tell you a little bit about how this exhibition started. As you may all know, there's the Fotografia Europea in town right now. The theme is being 20, and the director of this museum of Collezione Maramotti, she invited me to do an exhibition here. It's lightly based on the theme, so it would connect with the photo festival. So being 20, and I thought, what was it for me being 20? That's quite a long time ago for me, because I'm now 52. I lose track. And I also thought, like, okay, maybe I should make an exhibition from taking works from roughly the last 20 years, because it's a lot of rooms to fill and too much to make new works, especially for this exhibition. So I was looking at my own archive and looking at my own personal projects over time, and there was also the idea of looking at the Collezione, the Maramotti, and to look at the artworks in the collection. So I thought, okay, that could be very interesting to see which works from the collection I feel drawn to, and I can kind of mix with my own work. So I went looking in the archive, and there's so many incredible works in this collection. So I slightly went wild. I took like 120 images from their online archive and mixed them with my own works. And then Sarah said, well, it still should be your show, so maybe you should pick 4. So that made the whole idea very different. And I had 6 rooms, so I decided to collect works and to divide them into 6 kind of groups in a very intuitive way, because I always work in a very, very intuitive way. I don't really work with concepts beforehand, although that's not completely true, actually. I always think of conceptual art as something that is not me, at least not in the practice, in the way how I learned myself to work during the process of making work. Being 20, I remember that when I was 20 years old, I went to India for the first time with a friend of mine, one of my best friends, who's actually also here with me now in Reggio Emilia. And we went to India, and I got very, very sick. And I had to be hospitalized, and I was in a very small town, in a village up in the hills, and there was no real hospital, and I had lost like 7 kilos in 2 days. It was just fluids, you know, and that can be dangerous, right? It's dehydration, basically. Back then, I remember being in the hospital and getting this anxiety, like a panic attack, and I had this kind of hallucinations. Suddenly I saw myself in a coffin and dragged off the mountain by a few Indian people. And I was very sure at that moment that I would die. And that was, of course, very, very scary. And I think since then for a very long time, I've had this kind of existential fear of death and of dying. And that has influenced my work a great deal. So this exhibition, basically, it's called This Body Made of Stardust, and it is a collection of works over time from my own archive, or that somehow deals with the idea of death and dying and grief, but also, on the other hand, about life and how we hold on to life. It's also about time and the passing of time. It's about decay. All those things. But then in a very kind of loose way, I would say. So once I had the idea, the concept for the exhibition, it was quite easy to just pick different images from different periods of time from my work. So that's basically what you see here. I could tell you a little bit about the different periods of time. Like, for instance, those two works, the two small works there, and also the one here on the left. These are images that I made in East Africa. This was in the early 2000s, so 20 years ago. I did two big projects called Flamboya and Parasomnia. And I'm not sure how familiar you are with my work and with my background, but I lived in Kenya when I was a kid, from the age of 2 till 5, almost 6. I lived in Kenya with my family, and we lived in a small village near Lake Victoria, and my father was working there as a doctor in a local hospital. Maybe you have questions.
Curious about the idea of being an artist and a curator, and how those two things, did you find it difficult to step into the curator role? And because you said it was quite intuitive, you kind of brought an intuitive. I'm sorry? You were quite intuitive in how you were curating as well. So I'm curious about whether you find those two things, was it difficult to sit in a more maybe analytical role of your work, or did you find it kind of an extension of your artist practice?
As an artist, I'm very used to editing, and I think editing is like an extension of, or is kind of the same thing as curating in the essence. Ever since I was in art school, I've also always made my own books, often in collaboration with designers, but still always I would be the one picking my images and also making the combinations on the pages and to get a kind of a rhythm in the book, etc. And then also when you make exhibitions then you have the same thing, but then you have it on the wall. And I think being a photographer is very much about also about space. Even when I was in art school, I did these little book projects. So that is very much about editing and combining images. So still my very favorite hobby is to make PDFs in Keynote and combine images. So I think in a way I feel that I always do this kind of editing and curating my own work. And I'm also quite a quick editor because I think because I also work in fashion and fashion photography, that whole process, it's just so fast. And so if you're working on an editorial, for instance, you have only a day, and at the end of the day you have these 10 or 20 pictures, and even during the shoot, in between shots, I'm editing. So I'm very fast. I'm also a very impatient person, so that helps. I think what helps me a lot is the fact that I know what I want. I know quite well what I like and what I don't like. But again, in a very intuitive way. So for me, it's quite easy to kind of dismiss things or choose things, and
I wanted to ask you if you could tell us a bit about this work, because I don't know, I was very curious and I really like clothes and I'm very interested in that. Yes. But I also wanted to ask you about, because I see kind of all of these connections between bodies, but a lot of like created objects and like clothes, like bodies, and these like mixtures between the body parts and I don't know, maybe elements that elongate our body parts.
Yes.
I was also wondering about that.
Yeah, I think I've always been intrigued by the body, and maybe one of the reasons is the fact that my father was a doctor, And that from a very young age onwards, I picked up on these conversations at home between my father and my mother. They often spoke about sickness and death in our house. It was just a very normal thing. Also later on, when we went back to the Netherlands, after we lived in Africa, my father had his practice in our house. So often there would just be people coming to the door for emergencies or whatever. And so the body has always been something that's intrigued me. And I think, going back to that time when I was in India and got so sick, I think from that moment onwards, I wasn't sure if I could trust my own body. And also because of, if you hear so much about sickness and, everything that can go wrong with the body, that's kind of scary, especially for a child which is quite sensitive. But then I think clothes and fabric is kind of an extension of the body, or can be. And I think that's also one of the reasons why I have always been interested in fashion, but not even so much because of the style or the latest fashion or whatever, but more as a means to kind of transform the body. I think here you can see that there's a lot of images that also deal with the body being kind of cocooned, or there's like these cocoons, right? And that, so this artwork for me was very, kind of depicts that also in the same sense, that it feels like this kind of creature, almost fish-like. If I see it, I think of these very, very small creatures that were here like millions and millions and millions of years before the Homo sapiens. Yeah, I just love how all these jackets resemble real people that have worn them, because they're all secondhand, but still something else is, yeah. Oh God, guys, help me.
Did you collected them? Like, did you bought them one by one?
No. This is not my work. This is not my work. No. This is one of the 4 works from the collection. So when we made the exhibition, I was able to choose a few works from the collection, and I thought, okay, I'll do the works on the wall, and then I'll have 4 sculptures.
Yeah, I was just had a question, like drawing on what you were saying about the body and about fashion.
Yes.
What your relationship is to like materiality, because obviously like photography is a very 2-dimensional thing.
Yes.
But it seems like you're working with a lot of different materials, like sculpture and even like painting on the work. So I'm just wondering like what your process is for choosing what kind of materiality you're going to use.
Yeah. Well, I think I often see myself almost as a sculptor working in 2D, right? Like that's kind of counterintuitive, but I think it's interesting to look at the world from a kind of sculptural viewpoint. I always try to make kind of order in chaos, I would say. At some point I started making these collages. I'll tell more about it when we continue. This is one of my latest works, and this one was made especially for this exhibition. So I have to tell you a little bit of background information before we move on, because otherwise I lose my own thread. So when I was 22, my father passed away, and he ended his own life, sadly. He had a brain tumor, which was operated, and the operation went fine, but ever since his 30s or so, he had headaches. And then after the surgery, the headaches didn't go away. So at some point he couldn't work anymore, and he was in constant pain. And that made him so depressed that he decided to end his life. But it was very hard for us because it was very sudden still, although we knew that he was in so much pain constantly. And I think from that moment onwards, that has been like maybe the biggest kind of change in my life, that suddenly my father was gone. It was interesting. The other day I was here with someone and who noticed that I photograph a lot of hands, or that hands are quite important in many of my works. And he said that in art history it's interesting that the hand is somehow often connected with the idea of death. And that often in also for instance in funerals you see the face and you see the hands, and the hands are very important in that sense. And I remember when not long after I lost my father, I had this dream at night that I was walking on a field in early morning. And that suddenly I saw a hand laying just before me in the grass, and I bent over to reach out and to pick up the hand. But then I realized that I didn't have my own right hand, that it was a stump, and I couldn't pick up the hand which was there in the grass. And then I don't know, in the dream later on, I probably took the hand with my other hand and took it somewhere. But then afterwards, when I woke up, I realized that the hand was actually my father, right? That I lost my right hand, I lost my father. But I think the combination of that experience in India when I was so sick that I really thought I was gonna die, and then afterwards, the death of my father had made me very insecure. And from that moment onwards, I often had panic attacks. And so for a long time, I've had this existential fear of death and of dying. And in 2014, I think, I made this project called Umbra, and Umbra is a shadow. And I decided to investigate the shadows in my work because I noticed that often in my work the shadow plays a very significant role. So I started reading about the shadow, like the shadow in art history, the shadow in astronomy, like black holes and all of that, but also the shadow as Jung describes it in his theories about the archetypes. So we all have a shadow, our own personal shadow, and the more you suppress your own shadow, the stronger it becomes. And this is like this theory in psychotherapy, which is very interesting. And I think investigating your own shadows or your own obsessions is something as artists that we should do, or that so I did this project about the shadow, and when I finished it, I felt like I had investigated my own shadows, and in that sense I had relived that moment of fear and anxiety about death. Then afterwards, I felt like a renewed freedom somehow, and I started painting on my pictures, and I started doing like weird collages, etc. Like in the beginning, when I was working on my art, I would never allow myself to do these things. I always thought like, okay, my art is like serious, and I shoot everything on analog. On film, and there is no, I don't do any tweaking, no Photoshop. It's like serious, it's honest, etc. While at the same time, I was doing all the fashion photography and having so much fun doing all these crazy editorials for independent magazines, and just cutting up things and painting on my work, and doing all of these, using all of those techniques. And I think after Umbra, after all of that, that project was very kind of masculine, maybe. It was, I was reliving the grief and mourning over the death of my own father, basically. And it was it was almost kind of a philosophical project and almost spiritual, but it was also very, more abstract, more masculine. And then afterwards, I felt, like I said, I felt this renewed, I felt just much lighter. And by that time, I had become a mother myself. And so suddenly things were shifting, and I thought, what the heck, I'm just gonna have fun, and I'm gonna experiment even more with the material. And the materiality became something which was much more important. So I started making all these collages and painting on my images, which is also interesting because it becomes so different, you know, like here, it's just so great that suddenly, because when I make them, they're very small. So all the images that I use are from my own archive. So for instance, this element is this one. It's laundry drying on some bushes or shrubs in Madagascar. And this image was of two boys that I shot in Addis Ababa. And this one, maybe you know the actress Hunter Schafer. I did a shoot with her for another magazine. I had some props, etc. So I used those props to make collages with her images later on. But I still had this one. So that's from an editorial shoot. And the interesting thing is that because as I said, I make them very small first. I cut out these, I have this Canon selfie printer that I use. So it's kind of postcard format. Then I start cutting out all these little elements, and I kind of mix and match them. I play with them, I make pictures with my iPhone, and then later on I edit, etc. And then once I have one that I really like, then comes the process of enlarging it and making them in larger sizes. And then it's so interesting that suddenly all the details that you wouldn't see on such a small format become enormous. And I mean, these collages are not even that large, but I've made other ones that are much bigger. And you can see like all the pores, all the little hairs and everything, it's kind of magical.
You said you start with small collages and then enlarge them.
Yes.
Do you ever change your mind once they're enlarged?
That hasn't happened really, but I do alter them. So for instance, there's one with the two jerry cans. First, there was one which had a human body, black and white. Then I changed it into this one, which is more abstract and but still feels like a body. I think over time, some of them I get less attached to and others more. So some I use less and others more. Yeah. But I like the fact that with these collages, you know, often I would create kind of new combinations with them, and then sometimes it's like big installations, and they kind of almost merge together. But for this exhibition, this is actually the first time that I have them as like one object in between other works which are framed. Any other questions?
Could you tell us a bit about these two?
Yeah, these two are part of a project that I did in Versailles, in the Palace of Versailles in Paris. I was given the opportunity to work on an exhibition. It was like a group exhibition of 5 artists. We got carte blanche The only thing was that you had to make work which was somehow connected to Versailles. So for 6 months I was given free access to the palace and the gardens, etc. And I would always go on Mondays, because on Mondays it's closed to the public, to the general public. So I was just all by myself, wandering the palace, and I could look behind every door and open every cupboards, etc. It was really amazing. I don't know if you have ever been to Versailles, but it's just so enormous. So at first you feel kind of overwhelmed as an artist. But then I started reading a lot about the history of Versailles, and especially about women. And so I made a work, or several works actually, called Venus and Mercury. That's a project that I did. And it's a large installation with images kind of projected in a corner, slowly passing by. And I asked a friend of mine, Dutch writer Marjolein van Heemstra, to make poems based on these incredible stories that I found. So I found like 5, 6 of these stories, and she made them into poems. And then I asked actress Tilda Swinton to do the voiceover, and I made together with someone, I made like a soundscape with the voiceover, telling these stories about women, mostly women, at those times in Versailles. And it's very much about power dynamics between men and women. So many of these stories are also linked to the erotic or sexuality and these power dynamics. And I thought this one was interesting. So from the outside, it's just black with gold. It's very, but then if you open the lid, suddenly it's this bright, bright red. And I had it in an installation which also dealt with one of the stories of Marie Antoinette. And of course, she was beheaded. So it also was like a little wink to the idea of the guillotine. And the way that she, as a woman, was very much sexualized during the French Revolution. So the fact that she was a woman, well, made it even worse. Yeah. So this is also one of the works that I did in Versailles. There was a restoration atelier just across the street from the palace. And they restore all these sculptures and statues from the Louvre, from Versailles, but also from other places in Europe. Works come there to be restored. And I added this, I thought it was kind of amazing, this hole in her back. So I added the ink. Sometimes what I do is that when I work on these small formats, I use those small prints to paint on, and then I scan the print, and then I enlarge it. So for instance here, you can also still kind of see my fingerprint.
Do you always enlarge them, or like is there a particular reason why you enlarge them, or
I'm not
sometimes you
always.
leave them?
Yeah, I leave them small. Let's have a look here. Like this one, for instance. This is a small one, so this is an original one. Yeah, so this is the actual format that I make them in. Not all of them. The one over there on the very right-hand side, that is also enlarged. Here you can see that that the print is quite bad, like there's all these stripes, which is probably a sign that that the little printer is just getting old. I think this one, my son helped me to paint it. I think he did this one. Yeah. so you can see the little dots, etc. You know, they wouldn't be as big if this was one-on-one. So it's sometimes a bit confusing because these are not the ones that I scan and then enlarge are not unique works because, well, that's quite obvious. But then other ones, like the one over there, that painted one, that's a unique work. And I think it's interesting to think about photography. You know, of course, photography as a medium is, you always deal with the fact that you have this negative or this file and you can reproduce it endlessly. And we always talk about how to edition them, you know, and then do you have a small edition from just 2 or 3 or 5, or do you make larger editions, etc. Yeah, let's just go to the other. I think it was interesting as a photographer suddenly to start making unique works. And suddenly I felt sometimes a bit, kind of a bit sad to, once a work, a unique work was sold, that it is out of my hands and I will never be able to see it anymore. You kind of get attached to things. That's funny. Something which painters or other artists are so used to, I had to get used to somehow because I wasn't. Yeah, as a photographer, you can just you still have the base, right? Yeah.
How you select the objects that you use. Do you kind of have a setup in mind before you start shooting? How do they integrate? Yeah.
I mean, a lot of pictures that I take, I just find them. Like for instance, this one was one of the sculptures that they worked on in the restoration atelier. But sometimes I stage my pictures. So for instance, that one I shot in Zambia. You know, sometimes it's just much more like a collaboration. So you start thinking about ideas and showing the people who I work with my work, talk about it and talk about my intentions and my ideas, and then together you build something. And then sometimes, we would go to someone's closet or just gather material to work with. I did this project with a friend of mine. She's called Roxanne, and that's her. And for instance, in this case, we rented an Airbnb in the south of France, which looked interesting from the pictures online, like a real kind of family home. And she brought a bunch of clothes and things, and we just started experimenting and playing. I think. In my case, the idea of play is very important. It's really in the process of making that the things come to be. I mean, when I was younger, I would make drawings. I would always work with sketchbooks, and then I would basically just remake my drawings or my ideas. But I don't work like that anymore. So it's much more intuitive again.
I have a question, which is what is your relationship to colour? Because I've noticed, especially with the ones where you paint the photographs, that the colours are very vivid, a lot of very vivid greens and pinks and so forth. Is this an extension of this idea of playfulness, or is it sort of more calculated in the colours you use? For example, using the blue here for the feet. Is it something that's just part of this playing around with staging?
I think color has always been very important to me. One of the reasons were these very formative years that I spent in Africa, where color is so much more vivid in daily life. I mean, the light itself is just so much brighter. And where we lived, it was almost on the equator. So, at noon you would have almost no shadow. And also the shadows become much stronger. But also the people wear much more colorful clothes than here. And I think these formative years have left a big impression on me. So I've always been drawn to color. Sometimes it's very intentional, like for instance the blue feet here. There was a time that I experimented a lot with elements like, for instance here, the blue pigment, like with pigments, but also with gels and different colors to make colored shadows. It's funny because I think it was yesterday that I saw online, I saw this infographic, or how do you call it, which said that the images in the world become more muted. So from, how to explain this? God, it was super interesting. Like since the 1980s, the colors have become more muted. Like in interiors for cars, in clothes, in art, you know? So in the end, it all gets diluted and we are all going to gray. Yeah, watch out. Yeah. All right.
I have a question about camouflage.
Yes.
Or, I notice in quite a lot of the works, someone is kind of melding with their background, or is very closely connected to their background, and you don't have so much of a sense of the inner person necessarily. Would you connect that to, you were talking about shadow earlier? How does that figure? Like the sense of concealing the self in some way? You know?
Yeah. When I was younger, I once said in an interview that I'm a very shy exhibitionist. When I was still in my early 20s, I used to make. I was a model for a while, working as a model, and I worked with all these male photographers, and I noticed that they asked something of me that I wasn't prepared or willing or able to give them, which was this kind of sensuality or sexuality. For instance, they would say, yeah, you have to just pretend that I'm your boyfriend. Or they would say, make love to the camera. Ooh. Like really awful, thinking back of it. But and I was still very young. I just had my first boyfriend, and still experiencing my own sexuality and kind of, trying to find it out, and my own body and my own appearance, and so I started making self-portraits with the camera, and I think this was a way for me also to explore my own sexuality at the time. But I often felt like I was a bit too shy to show and my face and my body. So I would often just show my face in these self-portraits and maybe have a suggestion of something sexual or erotic, or I would just show my body but hide my face. And I think over time I noticed that also with photo shoots of just any kind of photo shoots, that when I would shoot people, I would often, in the process of editing, I would be most drawn to the images where I wouldn't see their faces. And it was not because I didn't like them or whatever, but it was because those images spoke to me the most, because they were, I couldn't really grasp what was going on. So we are so conditioned to look at other people's faces, to just either make a connection or to just categorize or just read them, right? Like, what is the emotion? Who is this? etc. And I think over time I came to realize that I was more interested in the idea of what it means to be human, like the core of it, to say something more on a kind of a universal way about what it means to be human instead of that particular person. So, yeah, I think maybe that's an explanation. You would also often see that I would, in my compositions, you don't see a lot of information. Like, it's often the camera is tilted on the ground, for instance, or you don't see a horizon, or the horizon is very simple. You don't have enough information to really understand where you are. And I think somehow that's something I've always been drawn to, because there's such an overload of images in this world that I am always looking for images that make me wonder or make me question, instead of, you know, just categorize them. This is an advertisement, or this is someone's personal photograph, or, you know, this is a documentary photograph or whatever.
Could you tell us something about that artwork? Because I feel like compared to the others, it's like almost empty.
Yes, that one.
Yes.
Yeah. I think I'm looking for some kind of abstraction in the human form or body, and in the end it feels like if I have to strip down my images, what do they become? Like this becomes a bit vague, but in the end it's often like circles, or it is like more kind of you would see a lot of horizontal images that are about the soil, the grave, the human body laying down. For instance, here the coffin, which is like a horizontal stripe almost, you know, and then there's the vertical stripe, which is not the dead figure, but the living figure. You would often have like two people embracing each other. So that's kind of the opposite of the horizontal image, which represents death. It's the vertical image which represents the living. And also this kind of connection between a person and an object, whether it be a plant or a tree or a chair or another human being. Kind of the longing for true connection, and then there's the circle, which is often in my compositions I try to make some order in chaos, but then at the same time you don't want, if there's too much order, if there's too much perfection, it's just boring. So then it needs to get off balanced again. So this is, in that sense, this is a bit of an odd one, because it is very much about composition and the circle, but then the neon kind of puts the emphasis on the circle, but it's not round. And also the circle, it's not completely in the middle of the image, so also that is kind of off. So it's more like an experiment in composition and how do you call that in art history? The perfect dimensions. Yeah, and kind of playing with that and just kicking it. Yeah. Here, there's a video of two hands. In this Umbra project, I asked another friend, Maria Barnas, a Dutch poet and writer and artist, to make poems about the shadow. And then one of her poems, I asked a friend of mine, David Petro, and he was born and raised in one of the townships of South Africa, and he was born deaf. So I asked him to translate this poem into sign language, and then I reversed the image.
I just wanted to ask a question about like surrealism and the surreal, because I noticed that the newer colleges are named after a surrealist game.
Yeah,
so I was just wondering if it's like a conscious interest in surrealism, or do you happen to just be drawn to more surreal themes and images in your work?
I think from a very young age onwards, I was very intrigued by surrealism. And I think for a very long time, my own subconscious has been, or maybe still is, a very important influence in my work. So the dream world is very important. And in the dream world, things can happen that cannot happen in reality, but still they make so much sense, right? Because they are symbols, they are metaphors, they are sometimes even mythological, which draws us back to this core that we call, I don't know what we call it, humanity, culture. So I think the surrealists really kind of nailed that, you know? For a long time, as a child, my life at night while I was sleeping and dreaming was equally important to me as my life during the daytime. You know, I didn't see any difference. They were really equal to me. And I think also at the age of 4, 5, when I had these, formative years spending in Africa, that is also the time in people's life when you're a toddler or whatever, of magical thinking, right? And that you kind of combine things that in a completely unlogical way, but for in the mind of a young child, it is all very logical and all kind of interconnected. You know, making collages, I was thinking of this game that the surrealists used to play, Cadavre exquis, which we all know. You know, you have a piece of paper, you draw the head and you fold it and give it to someone else who draws then the next part. You know, the process of assemblage, even more than collage, is something that runs through all of my work, not only the collages, but also my other pictures, my other work.
I was wondering what you hope visitors to take away specifically from the video with the use of sign language, because obviously most people will be able to understand the words, but not necessarily the signs. So I was wondering what specifically, the significance of the sign language is for people who don't understand the language. Who don't understand the sign language? Yeah. So when they're watching it and they're listening to the words, how you want the sign language to sort of enhance the experience of listening to the poem. Yeah. Especially with shadow, for example. I think for me personally, it's really about the human body as a form of expression which goes beyond speech. Yeah, that's my most, yeah, as simple as that. Yeah. I think with the human body, you can express so much, about feelings and thoughts and without speech. But then there's also this language, which is sign language, which most of us can't understand, which is, fascinating, because that's something that's a realm on its own between speech and the human body as a form of expression.
I'm curious about this. You're talking about this anxiety around death, and how maybe there's a disquiet to a lot of the images that have the theme of death in them, but they're also quite calm.
They're also quite
calm images. And how you find that, if there's a bit of an inner contradiction there for you? Or...
between death and calm?
Yeah.
I don't think so. I mean, death is probably quite calm.
Or like your anxiety?
Oh, my anxiety. Yeah. The anxiety, I think that was quite a long time ago. So I don't feel that very strong, sharp anxiety anymore. I think maybe being an artist and being able to express myself through my work has been like a catalyst for my own personal emotional world. And I think I always say that I think that a lot of artists, or almost maybe every artist, is making some kind of self-portraits, you know, and even if the work is very abstract or very conceptual, it's still something super personal. I think my own anxiety has become much calmer, yeah, over time. Yeah.
And do you think that the art making was part of that?
I think so, yeah. Because when I look at my brothers who kind of experienced the same thing, you know, I think they struggle much more. I mean, some of us have, I mean, I've also been in therapy for 4 years, just right after my father passed away. And that has helped a great deal. But still, I think being able to make work, and as I said, when I was kind of revisiting this whole process of mourning over my father's death, many years later after his death, in the project Umbra, that's when I really felt that I had kind of some kind of closure. Yeah. And I also think that coming to terms with death, it might be different for different people, but over time you learn. I mean, as a child, it's still kind of so mind-boggling. I mean, you have no idea what the concept of death is. I'm not sure still if I do know, but I think the harsh experience of my father's passing has been overscribed. How do you say that? Like overwritten by other people who have died in my, you know, in like people like who are close to me, and their deaths were much more were softer, I would say, and more gentle, and so then, you know, from life, from just aging, you get more experience also. Yeah.
Just wanted to ask something about almost the relationship between photography as a medium and grief, because with I know for me, with people I've lost, like I like to look at old photographs of them, and then there's something about the camera is sort of stilling the world and like pausing in the moment and stopping time that feels kind of interesting.
Very true. I think photography is this weird magical medium that can stop time. So a lot of images in this exhibition also deal with the idea of time and time passing and decay, etc. And I think, I still think, although I've made so many pictures in my life, the ones that are the closest to me are still my own family albums from my past when I was young, and seeing my grandmother who was still alive, my father, and friends who have passed away, and other family members. And I think there's just something so magical about that you can stop time and kind of keep something which has gone forever. Yeah. And I think I always felt that my father, being a doctor and saving lives, like very literal, especially, well, not only in Africa, also in the Netherlands, that his profession had something to do with the earth and the sky, like something magical, you know, in this kind of magical realm, which you can't always understand. between the dead and the living, and photography for me is kind of the same thing. Also has this magical quality. I also refer often to the medium of photography as if they are kind of portals. They transport you to another place, another world, another time, and that's what makes them so interesting. So for me, photographs are like portals to different to a different universe, or multiple universes, endless. And when I was young, I always loved to look at pictures in books and magazines, just wondering, because back then photography was still kind of real, you know, there was no Photoshop, etc. So the pictures that you saw in, I don't know, like National Geographic or in the newspaper or in a fashion magazine, though you had the idea still that it really happened, you know, and there was this kind of longing inside me, wanting to be there, or just this curiosity for other worlds, other people, other moments in time. And then at the same time, I think pictures are also kind of as mirrors. I'm very kind of, you know, not obsessed, but I'm very intrigued by the idea of the mirror, because everything is like, you know, not upside down, but in reverse. And a mirror can also function as a portal to another world. You have all these fairy tales or children's books where, you know, people step into the mirror and you know, are on the other side suddenly. I also think that pictures are mirrors in the sense that they also project what is already inside of you. I really think that if you look at an image and how you perceive it, what you take from it, has something also to do with your own ideas or your own upbringing and your own experiences.
I just had a question about the curation part, because you have so different like medium sizes. How did you and like also like different times? So how did you choose like between the different rooms how to mix and match the picture? Was it like an emotional like process, or maybe like more linked to the aesthetic or the theme?
Yeah, I always have a very aesthetic eye. I can't help it. It's just so I would often make combinations that that kind of work well together in sense of color and dimensions next to each other, shape, color, yeah, and then again, it's very intuitive. Yeah. Yeah, there's not like it's not like each and every room has a different concept. No. Shall we walk to the other room, and maybe you have another question? If you have any other questions, like not related to this exhibition, that's also fine.
How do you find the people that you take photos of? Do you have models, or is it sometimes you just walk down the street and find a person and ask, hey, can I take your picture?
It really depends. Of course, with my fashion photography, it's mostly professional models. Otherwise, I work a lot with non-professional models. And I think it's very important to establish this kind of relationship which is equal. So it's really about collaboration between me and the other person. And I think what is very important to me is that there is this kind of gentleness and mutual respect. And I think maybe also because I know what it's like to be in front of the camera, and I know quite well how awful it can be. But then also I never work with people who don't like to be photographed. They all want to be photographed. It's kind of intimate, right? So you have to establish something together. And of course there are pictures that I took of people just you know, who I meet on the road or just in the moment, but most of them were not like that. So for instance, this picture was made in Tanzania, and I spent a lot of time there in Moshi. My husband, he was born in Zambia and he lived in Tanzania for a long time. His father was also a doctor working in Africa, so we have the same background. And we still come a lot in East Africa, especially in Tanzania, because we still have a lot of friends there. And Fred is a lovely guy who was my guide and assistant for a while during the time that I made these pictures. And I was picking him up from home, and he lives in this kind of courtyard with other family members. And this was a younger sister of his and there was the laundry, and she was just walking through the laundry, like just having fun, like playing. And then at some point, Fred came and he took her like in his arms while he was still on the other side of the sheet. And then I thought, oh wow, that looks amazing, because it was almost like a ghost. So then we did some pictures, and then I chose this one, which again you don't see the face, because it's not about this girl, right? It's more about the idea. Almost like the Pieta.
When I saw the picture, I thought about the Pieta, like that's the first thing that came to my mind, because of the also like the textile that is white. Reminds me of the marble. And with the position of the body.
I was just going to ask, like, the most striking thing I think about this exhibition is that it's, as you said, bringing together 20 years of your artistic practice. I was just wondering, like, what point you're at now, like, in the art you're making, like, currently at the moment. Is it more like collage? Is it more painterly, photography?
Well, I think I'm at this point that I don't really know what I'm going to do next, which is kind of liberating and also scary in a way. I mean, I do still make a lot of collages because I felt like I haven't really explored it to the maximum, you know. So I'm very curious still. I think I just, like 2 years ago or one and a half year ago, I made this exhibition called Phosphor, and it is kind of a retrospective of 33 years of my work. And it was shown in Paris at the MEP, the Maison Européenne de la Photographie. And then it went to Japan and to China, then Amsterdam, Berlin, and then now it's going to go to Stockholm. So, and there's a big book, and it's like 33 years, and it's just a lot of work. And so the whole editing process, and then also all these exhibitions, and you know, installing them in all these different places, and everything that you know comes with having an exhibition, etc., took up so much of my time and energy. So right now, I feel like I need some quiet time to just kind of figure out what I'm going to do next. I think, you know, working both as an artist and also as a commercial photographer has given me the luxury of freedom, maybe even more so than with other. Oh, well, you know, there's a lot of artists. Most of us need to have another job next to our art because, you know, we can't afford to live just from our art. And same goes for me. I think that because I'm financially not totally dependent on my art, I have even more freedom to just explore very different territories, which I think is great. I don't have to worry about what collectors or, you know, critics think about the work, or kind of to repeat something that I got known for, you know. So I really like to explore more. I mean, I'm very interested also in moving image in film, although I think it's super scary because it's so difficult. Because suddenly, you know, if you think about the fact that I see myself almost like a sculptor in 2D, that I'm really looking for the right composition and the shape, which is perfect, etc. Suddenly, if you have movement that changes, you know, that one moment that changes into something else, and suddenly you have to deal with a narrative, with time, with movement, with sound, and then, I mean, I often work with large teams on fashion campaigns, for instance, and then sometimes the moment when film is involved, and I do direct these fashion films sometimes, it becomes so huge. You have like, instead of 30 people, you have like 120 people, you know, and I don't like large teams. I like to be personal and intimate, and also to be flexible and to be able, you know, as a photographer, if I shoot something here and I think, this doesn't work, then I can just turn around and go to the other side and then try something else. And when you work with film, you have this huge crew, and it just takes so much time, and I'm not sure if I'm patient enough to do that. Yeah. Thank you guys for coming.
Thank you so much for talking to us.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a pleasure having you here. Thank you for your attention.